by Crocker about 200 years after the actual incident, which took place in the 1640s. So this was painted in the 1850s, but the incident took place in the 1640s. And we see a Norwich, or a region around Norwich, which is totally undeveloped and extremely pastoral. If you were to look at the paintings of Albert Bierstadt, who documented the transition of Americans from rural and wilderness into the modern age, you would be able to compare John Denison Crocker's work to that and see the influences of it. I'm now standing in front of a painting by John Denison Crocker of Norwich Harbor. And it's a painting that documents what the harbor looked like in the second half of the 19th century. We see ferries and steamships, foreriggers, and the trains on either side of the harbor, indicating the immense commerce and industry that took place in Norwich and in the harbor in the 19th century. There are images of buildings in this painting that are still standing today, which make it an unbelievably good document. In fact, this painting was copied in lithographic form by the Kellogg brothers, who were to Connecticut what Currier and Ives were to the nation. The Kellogg brothers created calendars and book plates and used paintings done by 19th century artists for their material. This painting actually has been recreated in a lithograph by the Kellogg brothers and printed thousands and thousands of times over. Many people have in their collections this image. I'm now standing in front of another painting by John Denison Crocker entitled New England Mill. And it's particularly interesting because it depicts the Taftville mills, the Panema mills, which were actually the mills built and operated by the Slater family. I love this painting partly because it has a little vignette in the front center that I think is sort of a self-portrait by the artist. You see him from the rear, but he has his easel with him and he's clearly painting the view. Plus he has two children with him, and we know stories from John Denison Crocker's grandchildren that he loved to take his children with him on painting trips, not only in and around Norwich, but all the way into the White Mountains. And he considered these trips both recreational and vocational because he painted the mountains and he painted his environs in Norwich. I'd like to point out in particular the beautiful rendering of the sky. And this is probably a sunrise based on the angle of the mill, we know, which backed up to the east. I am often reminded of Crocker and his work on early mornings in Norwich, and I think it's the confluence of the three rivers that brings moisture into a valley that creates these amazing sunrises and sunsets. And if you look at a lot of Crocker's landscapes, you will see the sunrises and sunsets rendered again and again. I'm standing in front of a group of paintings and objects that relate to the Case family bequest to the Slater Museum. These two children, Ida and Ada Chase, were actually painted by Alexander Hamilton Emmons, who was approximately a contemporary of John Denison Crocker. He was a little bit older and he died a little bit younger. He was born in 1816 and died in 1884. They're lovely children who have a great story to tell in each case. You'll see a little basket held by Ada, who was kept busy from wiggling while she was being painted with a basket of peppermints. And by the time the painting was finished, the basket of peppermints was completely empty. Unfortunately, Ida died as a very, very young child. And as we move to a case nearby, you will see a death portrait of her. It is a photograph where she is lying in a coffin. Alexander Emmons took that photographic portrait and turned it upright to create this painted portrait where she looks like a lovely, active, living, rosy-cheeked child. Of Thomas Winship was painted by Shepherd Mount, who lived in Long Island and worked in Long Island extensively. He occasionally worked in southeastern Connecticut, but ship captains would have been going back and forth across the Sound and stopping probably in Orient Point, and would have known artists and merchants and farmers on both sides of Long Island Sound. The port painting, the Chinese port painting, was common in the 19th century among ship captains and ship owners who would come into a port, and Chinese artists who had sort of adopted a Western style would row out to their ships and offer to paint a portrait, and they would use fast-drying medium to varnish the paintings so that they would dry quickly and the ship owner could take the painting with him. And that caused a crackalure, a crackling of the surface. So when you see paintings of ships that have a film of crackle or little fine cracks all over them, it's very common and likely that they were painted in Hong Kong. This is the photograph of Ida Chase, dead in her coffin, which served as the subject matter for Alexander Hamilton Emmons' lifelike oil painting of her. And right next to it actually is the spyglass of Thomas Winship, which he is cradling in the painting by Shepherd Mount. This painting was painted by Jonathan Trumbull in the late 18th century, not the 19th century. Jonathan Trumbull was the son of John Trumbull, who was one of the governors of Connecticut. And this is a painting of the Norwich Falls, where the Yantic River falls over the rocks, about less than a quarter of a mile away from the museum due west. It's a beautiful painting, and if you were to go to this promontory, which is probably where the painting was painted from, you would have exactly the same view today as Jonathan Trumbull did in the late 18th century. Near this painting is a painting of Charles Converse, who was an industrialist in the 19th century, who built a mill complex, which is like an industrial complex of today, very close to Yantic Falls. Charles Converse, later in life, made a gift to the Norwich Free Academy so that the Slater Museum could be added onto with the Converse Art Gallery, and that's behind us. These are students drawing from the antique, as I mentioned earlier, which was a phrase used in the 19th century to indicate that they were drawing from ancient sculptures. And they are drawing today, as they did 121 years ago, from the casts, using them as subject matter for life drawing. And William Slater's grand tour in 1894. They left out of New London on their yacht Eleanor, named for their daughter, and spent 13 months touring the world, which was a phenomenon that was not uncommon in the late 19th and early 20th centuries among the wealthy. This exhibition, entitled Around the World on the Yacht Eleanor, the Slater's Grand Tour, tells the story of the yacht, their life at sea, the places they visited, and the phenomenon of the Grand Tour in the 19th century in general. If you visit this exhibition, you'll not only learn about the Slaters, but you'll learn about the countries they visited and the cultures they experienced when they visited them. This is a reproduction of a reefer jacket, which was commonly worn by men who either captained ships or owned them. The owners were often referred to as commodores. And we have an image of William Slater wearing a reefer jacket. So in the exhibition Around the World on the Yacht Eleanor, we recreated the reefer jacket for visitors to see. It's right next to a ship's wheel that very much like the one on the Eleanor, the Yacht Eleanor. And this one comes from a yacht, a 19th century yacht, that won the America's Cup. This is a model of the Yacht Eleanor, which was built in Boston, Massachusetts. The yacht itself, built in 1894, was built at the Bath Iron Works in Bath, Maine, and sent down the Kennebec River. It was launched into the Kennebec River and sent down the river to the Atlantic Ocean along the coast, and then eventually to New London. The ship was trimmed out in the finest of woods, stained glass, oriental carpets, beautiful chandeliers and furnishings. It had hot and cold running fresh and salt water, a laundry on board, a gourmet restaurant-style kitchen, dining room, saloon, reading rooms, a huge library, and it was a place where the Slaters literally lived their lives for 13 months while at sea. Included in this exhibition are beads known as mummy beads from Egyptian mummies. Mummies were sent into the next life with a variety of objects, personal ornament, vessels so that they could eat and drink in the afterworld, and even images, both. This is a portion of the exhibition Around the World on the Yacht Eleanor, the Slater's Grand Tour, which depicts objects from France. We have French fans, French shoes, French glass, and ceramics. The fan was very important to European culture. It was brought to Europe from the Far East, most probably China. But the French adopted it very, very vigorously and used it both as a means to cool themselves, but also to send messages to possible lovers, to rivals. There was a whole language of the fan that every refined woman. In the exhibition Around the World on the Yacht Eleanor, the Slater's Grand Tour, are paintings that can be said to be Barbizon school paintings. This was a movement in the 19th century that took place in France near the forest of Fontainebleau. These artists rejected the romantic and what they saw to be frivolous depictions of rural France and embraced the real rural French. We have a painting that was actually in William Slater's collection, painted by Charles Jacques. And both of these paintings, this one by Bayeux, depicted sheep and chickens and shepherds and farmers doing exactly what they do in normal life. They were not made to appear fake or glorified. They were actually painted as they existed with their animals in real life. If you'd like to see more paintings, more objects, jewelry, fashions, photographs, and silver that represent represents the Slater's Grand Tour for revisit the Slater Museum and all of its collections.